Um, so have you ever been in the middle of a perfectly normal conversation? You say a word, and then, like, seconds later, you completely draw a blank on what you just said.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It happens all the time.
Right. You just sit there staring at the person across from you thinking, "Oh, what was the word I literally just used?"
Yeah, and we usually just brush that off, right? We call it a brain cramp or, a glitch in the matrix, or we just blame it on not getting enough sleep the night before.
Exactly. Yeah. But what if that mental blank wasn't a glitch at all? What if your brain was actually, like, actively working in real time to hide a painful truth from you?
It's a slightly terrifying thought when you really sit down and realize the implications.
Oh, totally.
Just the idea that our own minds are scanning our conversations and censoring us without our permission, like intercepting our own thoughts before we even have the chance to process them.
Terrifying, yeah, but
Yeah.
entirely fascinating. And that is exactly what we are getting into today. Welcome to our deep dive into some truly foundational early experimental psychology.
It's a great topic today.
It really is. We have a stack of clinical excerpts detailing early laboratory experiments on the faculty of memory. Specifically, we are exploring word association tests and this fascinating technique the researchers called the reproduction method.
Yeah, and the sources we are looking at today are essentially the laboratory notes of early psychologists who are trying to prove that the subconscious mind isn't just some, abstract philosophical concept.
Right, they wanted hard data.
Exactly. They wanted to measure it. They wanted to prove that the things we forget and the exact milliseconds it takes us to answer a seemingly simple question can actually map out our deepest, darkest secrets.
So the mission for this deep dive is to essentially reconstruct that map for you. We are going to explore how these early doctors tracked the tiniest hesitations to uncover repressed complexes.
They were basically inventing psychological detective work.
They really were. And it all starts with a very specific recurring observation they were making in the clinic with hysterical patients. So tell us about the setup here. What were they doing?
Well, the clinical setup was pretty straightforward, but incredibly revealing. Doctors would administer a standard word association test.
Okay.
So they would read a stimulus word, and the patient was instructed to reply with the very first word that popped into their head.
Like I say dog, you say cat.
Exactly like that. But the doctors noticed a pattern. Sometimes a patient would take an unusually long time to react to certain seemingly harmless words.
Right.
And then, crucially, when the doctors would circle back later and ask the patient to simply repeat the reaction they had just given, the patient couldn't do it.
They just lost it completely.
Gone. The memory of their own reaction was entirely wiped away in a matter of minutes. The patient would look at the doctor and literally ask, "Wait, what was the word you said?"
Okay, let's unpack this because I think the best way to visualize it is like your brain acting as a highly aggressive email spam filter.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Right. Because if we think about how a spam filter actually works, it scans incoming messages for flagged keywords.
Right.
If it spots a threat, it doesn't just put the message in a folder where you might accidentally click it.
No, it gets rid of it.
Exactly. A really aggressive filter intercepts it, deletes the message, wipes the server log, and presents you with a totally empty inbox. You never even knew the threat was there to begin with. It is a total systemic cover-up.
That is a phenomenal way to visualize it. Just as the spam filter is looking for dangerous code, the subconscious is scanning for dangerous emotions.
Right.
And the author of our text roots this entirely in the early work of Freud and Brewer, specifically their concept of repression.
Repression, yeah.
Yeah. In this psychological framework, forgetting is not a passive accident. Forgetting is equated with a very active, forceful mechanism. It is the mind's way of saying, I do not want to remember this unpleasant impression, so I'm going to quarantine it.
The brain is just protecting itself from emotional pain by torching the bridge to that specific thought.
And what's fascinating here is that this barrier between the conscious mind and the subconscious is incredibly robust. I mean, Freud recognized early on that his hysterical patients had a repressed complex at the root of their illness.
Right, there's always a root cause.
Yeah, and to treat them, you have to find the complex. But because the brain so aggressively splits these painful images off from conscious awareness, getting to them is it's like breaking into a vault.
It's locked tight.
Completely. Freud originally invented his famous free association method to get past this. The idea was to let the patient talk in a stream of consciousness for hours, slowly lowering their defenses until a clue slipped out.
But our source document points out a massive flaw with free association. it takes forever.
It really does.
It is an exhausting, time-consuming process for everyone involved.
Yeah, it requires immense patience and very specific interpretative skills. So the researchers in our text realized they had stumbled onto a massive shortcut.
Which is the reproduction method.
Exactly. Instead of slowly coaxing the patient's defenses down, they developed the reproduction method, which is essentially a brute force stress test.
Oh, okay.
They administer a list of usually 100 stimulus words. Then they simply repeat the entire experiment and see where the patient's memory fails.
They're looking for the exact failure points, like stress testing a bridge until a bolt snaps. They're looking for the exact word where the brain's spam filter kicks into overdrive.
That's exactly it. By tabulating the specific words where the memory is wiped clean, or where the reaction time spikes abnormally, they found a way to mathematically pinpoint the painful secrets.
Let's see how this stress test actually worked on a real person, because the clinical data in this text is wild. Walk us through that first major clinical example they provide, the professional musician.
Yeah, this is a 32-year-old man who came to the clinic suffering from vague, debilitating anxiety states. His primary symptom was a compulsive, paralyzing fear that he wouldn't be able to give solo performances anymore.
Okay, so performance anxiety, but extreme.
Very extreme. And when you dive into the patient's background notes, his personal life was just absolute chaos.
Chaos might be an understatement from what I read.
Oh, yeah. 2 years prior to the clinic visit, he breaks off an engagement with a woman the text describes as having an implacable, jealous, and quarrelsome nature.
Yikes.
Right. They had violent rows. He seemingly caused the breakup by writing picture postcards to another girl.
Of course he did.
Following that, he has a secret affair with a lady from a rich and distinguished family, which eventually ends.
Okay.
Then he gets engaged to a completely new girl who, he later discovers, is already 3 months pregnant by another man.
Oh, wow. I mean, that is a lot.
And on top of all that, the clinical notes indicate he led a very dissolute life in his early 20s that heavily drained his physical and mental health.
So we have a guy who is practically radiating repressed emotional trauma.
Mm-hmm.
How did he perform on the 100-word stress test?
Well, the hard data is stunning. Out of the 100 words, he had 38 incorrect memory reproductions. He completely forgot 38 of his own answers. And the researchers noted that out of those 38 failures, all but 5 were directly linked to a verified hidden emotional complex.
That is, I mean, I want to dig into the mechanics of those failures because there's one specific example in this chart that just blew my mind. Tell us about the word water.
Okay, so the doctor reads the stimulus word water, the stopwatch starts. It takes the patient an agonizing 4.2 seconds to react, and he finally blurts out the word to drown.
4.2 seconds is an absolute eternity in a rapid-fire word association game.
Oh, totally. Normal reaction time for this test is a fraction of a second, maybe 1 or 2 seconds max.
Right.
But during the second phase, the reproduction test, when the doctor asks him to recall what he said in response to water, he draws a total blank on his own morbid answer. Instead, he offers a completely new word. He says deep.
He completely sanitized his own dark thought.
Yeah.
Let's look at what is mechanically happening in the brain during those 4.2 seconds, because it's not just a pause.
That's very active.
Right, the brain hears the word water. The associative memory instantly triggers the concept of drowning, but the subconscious spam filter recognizes that drowning is a massive emotional threat. So it slams the brakes on the neural pathway.
It actively blocks it.
Exactly. It halts the vocalization, denies the conscious mind access to the thought, scrambles for a safe alternative, and finally spits out the reaction. All of that frantic internal processing takes time, which is why we see a 4.2-second delay.
Yeah, and through further clinical analysis, this specific delay revealed a hidden suicide complex.
Wow.
The patient had been secretly harboring thoughts of suicide as a result of his illness, and his brain was expending massive amounts of energy to keep that terrifying reality hidden from his conscious awareness.
And all that energy expenditure leads to a really critical concept the text introduces here. They call it the perseverating feeling tone.
The emotional hangover.
The emotional hangover, yes. Let's stick with the computer analogy. If your brain is a computer, the word water just triggered a massive background scan. The CPU is completely maxed out dealing with the emotional threat of the suicide complex.
It's running at 100% capacity.
Right. So when the doctor reads the next word on the list, which might be something totally innocent like table or apple, the system is still lagging. The text shows how this patient's reaction times for the next several completely unrelated words were dramatically slowed down simply because the brain was still internally reeling.
The processing power is entirely consumed with pushing the dark thought back down into the subconscious vault, leaving very little cognitive bandwidth to deal with the immediate reality of the test.
Okay, wait, I have to stop you there, because I am putting myself in the shoes of a skeptic reading this early research.
Sure.
Are we absolutely sure this is a structural active repression mechanism? Like, if you ask me a question and the word reminds me of a sad memory, I might just zone out for a few seconds. I get distracted, I lose my train of thought, and that causes a delay.
That's a fair point.
So why did these researchers jump to the conclusion that the brain is forcefully splitting the thought away from consciousness? Couldn't the guy just be, distracted?
You would think so, and frankly, that's the exact critique many skeptics leveled at this methodology early on. But the text tackles this head-on by pointing to the clinical distinction between a wandering mind and an active blockage. The author describes these specific memory failures as island-like amnesias.
That is a very specific phrase. Island-like amnesias.
It is. Think about it this way. If you are just distracted or daydreaming and someone nudges you and asks, hey, what did you just say? You can almost always retrieve the thought.
Right, you can pull it back.
The pathway's still there. But in these clinical cases, the amnesia is total. It is highly specific, and it is isolated entirely to the words that touch the complex.
So it's not a general fog.
No, the memory isn't misplaced. It is structurally walled off, like a quarantine sector on a hard drive. The sheer consistency of these targeted deletions across hundreds of tests proved to the researchers that this was an active defense mechanism, not just a passive distraction.
It's way too precise to be an accident. So with the musician, we see how this test can uncover past trauma. But here's where it gets really interesting.
Oh yeah, case two?
Yeah, because the researchers didn't just stop at analyzing the past. They realized they could use this exact same methodology to predict future or hidden behavior in real time.
We see that predictive power vividly in the second major case study.
Let's talk about him. This patient is a 22-year-old young man. The clinical notes describe him as educated, sensitive, excitable, and, quote, morally unsound.
Which is quite a label.
Quite a label. He's highly impulsive. In fact, he ended up in the mental hospital because of a conflict sparked by a friend who drew a caricature of him with ass's ears.
Wait, literal donkey ears.
Literal donkey ears. And he was so deeply offended by the doodle that he slapped the friend and challenged him to a duel with sabers.
A saber duel over a drawing.
Over a drawing. So his baseline is highly volatile. He's got complexes about a diamond pin from an amorous lady, a wild stint in the cavalry, and a terribly strained relationship with his family.
So the doctors had their hands full with this guy.
Oh, absolutely.
But they decided to run the reproduction method on him, and the mathematical data they pulled is incredibly revealing. They calculated the mean reaction times for his answers. The mathematical mean for the words he correctly repeated during the memory test was 3.0 seconds.
Which, to be fair, is already a bit slow, probably because he just naturally guarded.
Yeah, but when they calculated the mean reaction time for the words he forgot during reproduction phase, it spiked to 5.0 seconds.
Wow.
That is a massive, statistically significant jump across the board.
The data proves the internal struggle. And when you look at the specific words causing that 5.0 second traffic jam, a wild pattern emerges.
Yeah, the doctors noticed these massive delays combined with complete memory failure, clustering around very specific romantic stimulus words.
Okay, like what?
Well, the word to kiss took him 3.4 seconds. The word still took 3.6 seconds. And the phrase to pay attention, which seems fairly innocent, triggered a staggering 6.2 second delay.
6.2 seconds of dead air just to react to the phrase to pay attention.
Yeah. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, we see the practical, almost investigative power of this psychological tool.
The detective work.
Exactly. The doctors reviewed this data and formed a very specific hypothesis. The delays and the memory wipes around these romantic words indicated a live, active complex. They suspected he had started a secret love affair behind the hospital staff's backs.
So they pull him into the office and confront him. They ask him point blank if he is seeing someone new.
And he completely denies it. He lies right to their faces. But the very next day, the hospital staff intercepted a letter addressed to the patient. It was from a girl he had met when he was allowed out on parole. The letter was filled with schemes on how they could keep their relationship hidden and detailed plans for a secret rendezvous.
That is incredible. The word association test essentially read his mind. The subconscious delays gave away his real-world secrets, even while his conscious mind was actively lying to the doctors.
It demonstrated that the reproduction method was an objective metric for uncovering hidden facts. In fact, the text notes that this specific methodology became highly influential in the emerging field of criminal psychology.
Really?
Yeah, it laid the early groundwork for the modern polygraph test. The idea that the complex isn't just a mental illness, the complex could be the guilt of a crime.
Wow, okay, so what does this all mean for the actual words the patients say out loud? We've talked about the massive delays and the forgotten answers, but how do we make sense of the specific, fake words they offer up in the moment? Why does the brain manufacture these highly specific reactions, only to toss them into the amnesia bucket seconds later?
Well, to understand that, the author introduces the concept of screen memories.
Screen memories.
Yeah. These reaction words that are so easily forgotten are essentially unconscious excuses. They are superficial cover-ups designed to throw everyone, the doctor, and the patient's own conscious mind completely off the scent of the real trauma.
Let me put this in everyday terms. A screen memory is like a panicking teenager whose parent just unexpectedly walked into their bedroom while they were making a huge mess.
Okay, I can picture that.
The teenager grabs a random piece of clothing and just throws it over the mess. It is a hastily constructed, flimsy lie invented on the spot just to fill the silence. And because it's a meaningless lie, the teenager instantly forgets about the piece of clothing the second the parent leaves the room.
That is precisely how the mechanism operates. And the text gives a brilliant, albeit really tragic, clinical example of a screen memory.
Yeah, tell us about the 23-year-old.
Right. They tested a 23-year-old hysterical woman whose mind was just a maze of intense trauma. Earlier in her test, the word water had triggered a memory of a suicide attempt.
Oh.
The word angel had triggered images of death, so she is highly reactive. The doctor gives the stimulus word to kiss. She takes an agonizingly long time to process it, and finally she blurts out the phrase, "sister's kiss."
Which sounds so completely innocent.
On the surface, it is the perfect piece of clothing thrown over the mess. But during the reproduction test, she completely forgot she had ever said sister's kiss.
It's gone.
Completely. The author explains that she forgot it because it was a flimsy evasion. It was a screen memory manufactured by her subconscious to hide a much deeper, far more painful erotic complex that she simply could not bear to confront.
But wait, if these are excuses and evasions, and they look exactly like someone dodging a question, aren't these patients just consciously lying?
It looks like it, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, if a patient takes a long time, says an innocent word like sister's kiss, and then later claims to have forgotten it, doesn't that just prove they are faking it? That they are pretending to be sick to get out of trouble?
That is the exact trap that many early observers and even some doctors fell into. The text spends a significant amount of time clarifying this exact point. The deceptive nature of these reactions frequently caused hysterical subjects to be falsely accused of conscious pretense.
People assume they were just making it up.
Exactly. However, the clinical data proves that the evasion is completely unconscious.
So the patient isn't lying to the doctor. The patient's brain is lying to the patient.
That is a perfect way to put it. The real complex is entirely cut off from their own awareness. The text notes that very often hysterical subjects can only be shown what lies behind these suspect reactions under hypnosis.
They literally do not know they are hiding anything.
No, they don't. The brain's defense mechanism operates entirely below the level of conscious control. It is an automatic survival instinct.
Which makes you wonder if this is just a glitch in people with severe trauma, or if this is how all of our brains are wired.
Right, and this raises an important question about the universality of this mechanism. The text explicitly states that this is not confined to the walls of a hospital.
So it's everyone.
The author writes that whether you are a normal subject, a hysterical subject, or a catatonic subject, the underlying psychological architecture of hiding the truth from yourself is exactly the same.
It's just a matter of scale then.
Exactly that. For a normal, everyday person, touching a repressed complex might just cause a brief flash of embarrassment or a momentary hesitation. You lose your train of thought for a second.
Like we talked about at the beginning.
Right. Now, in hysterical cases, it causes the arbitrary island-like amnesias we saw with the musician. And in extreme catatonic cases, it creates a complete, impenetrable barrier to reality. But the gears turning underneath, that spam filter, that is a universal human trait.
That fundamentally changes how you view your own interactions.
Yeah.
Which brings us to the ultimate takeaway for you listening.
Yeah.
You now have a window into the hidden mechanical gears of your own mind. The next time you are in a seemingly simple conversation and you inexplicably draw a blank, or you notice yourself hesitating for just a second too long to find a word, you will know that it might not be a random lack of sleep.
It rarely is just sleep.
No, it might be your own internal reproduction method pointing a big, flashing arrow at a hidden complex your brain desperately doesn't want you to see.
It guarantees you will never look at a forgotten name or a sudden lapse in memory the same way again. Your brain is constantly, quietly curating your reality behind the scenes.
It is the ultimate protector, operating entirely in the shadows. And that leaves us with a final lingering thought to mull over.
Okay.
We've spent this time seeing how our brains expend tremendous amounts of physical and cognitive energy manufacturing screen memories, purposely slowing down our processing speed, and inducing precise amnesias just to protect us from unpleasant truths.
A huge amount of energy, yeah.
But what would actually happen to our sanity if we somehow bypassed that filter completely? If we remembered every raw, painful, true reaction instantly, without the brain stepping in to sanitize it, would we even be able to function? Is forgetting ultimately our most vital survival tool?